So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to draw cloth. Okay, just give you a few tips, and I'll draw a little bit of it. There's a photo that I gave you guys in class, and so and it's on Canvas for you as well. So we'll go from there, we'll draw that image that I put up there. So a couple things to think about. So let's say you are drawing a cube. Okay, and the reason I'm bringing up a cube and I'll bring up a sphere is that what ends up happening is that you will follow some of the same ideas. Okay, so if we're drawing a cube, again, the trick that I talked about before in class is you really don't want to create hard outlines. Okay, so what will end up happening, of course there'll be some reflected light here, but I'm just going to make it kind of simplify it, is that the cube, the edges, a little bit more clean and more hard-edged. Okay, so again, I don't really want outlines, but what I want is I want things to end kind of abruptly. Okay, like I said, it's sort of a sharp edge. So when I'm going to the cast shadow, okay, again, it's pretty much just ends, and then all of a sudden the cube kind of ends, and then there's the shadow. Okay, and so then up here, what ends up happening again, it just sort of ends. Okay, and so when I put my tone in over here, I'll just try not to put it in as dark. And it sort of just stops. So I'll actually kind of darken this one up to get it to separate again. Okay, and so on and so on. So again, the trick is just to whenever you have these real sharp edges to just kind of quit. Okay, when we're drawing the sphere, the idea on that one is that, yeah, there's sort of a harder edge here where you get to that occlusion shadow. But again, the cast shadow, a little fuzzy. We'll kind of mass in our dark. Okay, but what ends up happening is that we'll have a little core shadow there that will of course be darker, but what ends up happening is that you get everything to kind of fade out a little more gradual. Okay, so if I put a little bit of charcoal in there, what I'm going to end up trying to get to happen is to have this thing get smooth. Okay, so it's still darker there, but I have this softer fade. It doesn't, again, like end and start up again with a really hard edge. I can put a little more tone. Again, I'll just kind of soften this out and, something like that. And that's what we were trying to do there. So the reason I'm bringing these things up is that when you're drawing cloth, you're going to have a few areas that are really smooth and you get these soft gradual value changes. But what will end up happening in other areas is that the cloth, like one of them will be overlapping the other one. And so you get this, and you can even kind of see it there with my hands that, well, this is going to catch more light, and then of course this won't. So you're going to have this spot where it just ends very quickly. And then, there's the dark, really dark, against really good bright light. So there's a lot of contrast. And then some other areas, like say here on the edge of my hand, it's going to be a more of a gradual fade. Okay. So I've just got a few different charcoal pencils. You can draw this in whatever you want to. Graphite's pretty good. Actually, I'll use this one. Graphite works pretty good. Charcoal works good. You can do this in ink if you want to also. You just have to, of course, layer your lines. And so when I sketch this in, basically I'm just trying to look for the larger forms. Trying to keep all my lines kind of light. Okay, because again, I don't want really hard edges, at least not at first. There's going to be a few areas where there's going to be some hard edges, but I'm going to try to keep those at a minimum in the beginning. And so as I'm going, I can kind of block in some masses. Okay, so I just kind of sketch it out. The other thing I usually talk about with cloth is that the hard part can be to really capture the weight, how gravity pulls on it. So that's, you know, one of the things you want to look for. You don't necessarily want to make things too angular. You don't want to make them, when you start drawing your contours, you don't want to necessarily like sketch it like this. Sometimes it doesn't look right. Just try to pull your lines kind of quickly, whether it's a little more angular, more of a curve. You know, in some areas it'll be a little more of a curve, in some areas it's a little more of a sharp angle. Okay, but draw more with your elbow and your shoulder, and you're more likely to get the curve that you're looking for. Okay, so this is actually a good area that we're going to focus on here. So I'm going to actually kind of move this line over a bit. Because what happens in here is that there's a darker shadow in here. That is a little bit further back, because this part of the cloth here is a little bit closer. And then, of course, where I'm putting that shadow, it's behind it. And so right now I'm just kind of sketching with an HB, but I don't know if I would start with an HB if I were you. You can. If you tend to have a tendency to go really dark really quickly, you can. Just don't happen to have like a 2B or a 4B with me right now. So I'm starting out with something lighter, but I like going with something more in the middle range. So, you know, I'm actually going with something that's a little bit lighter of a charcoal right now. Okay, so again, right here, this part of the cloth is closer, this part of the cloth is further back, so it's more in shadow. So what I'm going to end up doing is that, again, it's not going to be a line. It's not going to necessarily be this hard outline. It's just a value or a tone that just stops really quickly. Okay, again, much like that. Okay, so we'll darken that in a bit. And there is a few different tones in here. Okay, let's see, I have a 6B right here. This one's a little softer and it'll let me go darker quicker. And so again, I can push that back further. Okay. And so on this side, it's not like it doesn't have any tone to it. Okay, but again, it's lighter, and then just ends up finishing right up there against the edge. It just stops. Okay, but there's a slight crinkle, a little fold, or kind of a wave, however you want to think of it, in this part of the cloth. So it gets a little darker over here. So again, much like I did over here, I want this to be a softer change, a more gradual change. Okay. And then over here, there's a core shadow going across there, and there's some reflected light here. I'm going to bring some of that in. Put a little more of a tone here. I'm going to emphasize this little core shadow a little more. And again, really what I'm going to do is try to soften this out a little bit. So as you're drawing cloth, that's what you're going to look for, is that some of the areas will be a little more like that, and then some will have softer fades in them. Because most of us can get the shape, you may get a little practice and you can get the waviness to it, the softness to it, the weight of how the cloth is hanging. But it's always this part here where we have to really get in there and draw all the different values, all the different lights and darks. That's the part that always seems to get us. And so if you can get good at doing those two things, you're going to find drawing this isn't as difficult and overwhelming as you think it is. Zooming over here, there's a little bit of reflected light in the middle. And so I'll soften this up a little bit more. So between softening and building things up a little bit more, that's how I can get more gradual changes in value. This one's actually pretty sharp right up against that light. Yep, like right here. But then it actually kind of fades. And then some of the areas, if you go too dark, you can use the eraser, which I'll do here in a little bit. I'm back to a 6B just because I want to push some of this a little bit darker. Again, now that I have some more tones, I can really push this one further. Okay, and so again, if there's some light I need to bring out, I can always kind of pull it back out with an eraser. Maybe even here, right against the very edge. And this is what ends up, again, being the big trick to drawing cloth is just obviously understanding value, but knowing when to, again, not have outlines, but have more contrast, and then when to let things be a little bit softer. Oh. There you go. So it needs a little more work and a little more smoothing. But that's the general idea of how to get started. And again, you can do this the same thing with graphite. You can do this with ink. But you'll tend to find that if you like to work a little smoother, and I haven't smoothed this out that much, that charcoal is kind of the way to go. So, but same concepts either way. And some of this, I'm just going to sketch in a little more. Try to flesh it out just a bit. And then we'll call it good enough for now. So even as I'm drawing some of these things in, I'm kind of doing the same thing. I'm just kind of scanning and going, all right, where do I have a definite high contrast, dark against light? There's not a ton of areas on this particular image, this particular piece of cloth.